What they said about the bright lights was really true, by the way. I can't see a damn thing up here, but that's okay. Thank you. My name is Patrick Donegan. I work for Hardin Stance, which is an industry analyst firm focused on the intersection of cybersecurity and the telecom sector. If you work for a telecom operator and you think that a data breach is someone else's problem, I would invite you to get on a plane and go down to Australia and have a chat with some of the folks at Optus who've been having a pretty grim time of it of late. And that issue, that problem, has reached into some of the furthest corners of that organisation. Optus aren't the first telecom operator to suffer that type of issue at all. I would also invite you to see if you can find time to have a chat with their CEO, a lady who's been under such pressure in the last few weeks arising from the data breach they suffered, that as last time I looked a few days ago, her job was on the line. So if you look at that incident at Optus that many will have read about and think to yourselves, you know what, that could actually be my organisation, then congratulations, thank you, you're part of the solution. If you look at that incident and go, oh, it couldn't happen to us, you're part of the problem. Telcos are very good, always have been, still are very good at what I would call telecom security, securing the telecom infrastructure. They're very good at protecting data in transit. It's their core business. Telcos are pretty good on that, by the way. When it comes to regular enterprise IT security, however, telcos are actually not all that good. They're not much better than most organizations. And indeed, the data breach that hit Optus on a massive scale was indeed an enterprise IT issue, a vulnerability in their web APIs. And from a customer perspective, there's no point saying that, oh, we protect your data in transit brilliantly. The customer doesn't care how you lose their data. They have absolutely no interest in how that happens. If it happens on the IT side, it's as big of a problem for them as if it happens on the telecom side. We are not here to talk about the enterprise IT side of the telco. We're here to talk about the telecom infrastructure side of the telco. And when I said that telcos have a track record of doing that pretty well, I think the issue we face and what we're going to talk about today is what happens to that telecom security in a cloud-native environment, in a cloud and multi-cloud environment, because frankly, a lot of those ways of doing security get thrown up in the air, have to be completely recast. So that is the subject of our conversation today. You already know Luis, who was on the previous panel. I'd like to also introduce Nagendra Baikampadi. Nagendra is the head of Security Architecture and Standards for Rakuten Symphony, immediately to my left. To his left is Andy Jones. Andy is director of Jones the Phone and a consultant to the TIP leadership team. So I'm going to crack straight on because we have limited time. I'm seeing 26 minutes. I have not spoken for 14 minutes. I know I haven't. Is it possible to adjust the time so that we know what we're doing, David, who I can't even see? David, if you're around there, are you able to adjust the clock for us so we know what we're doing better? That would be great. I won't be able to see you. Okay, so the first thing we want to look at is in terms of that transition to a cloud environment from a telecom operator perspective, the biggest challenges from a security perspective, Luis, that you are seeing, expect to see, have seen?
Okay, there's some challenges. First one, let's say, is that there's more security risks than before because there is more software in a cloud-native environment, the telco cloud that we are building, because even the things that were hardware, the NICs, now they incorporate software for acceleration, so there's actually more software. So that's the first challenge, that we will have more security risks than before. Another challenge is that, as we discussed in the previous panel, the telco cloud is about decoupling the software and the hardware. So this creates layers, and each one of the different layers, the hardware, the infrastructure operating system, and the software itself has its own security, its own risks, and we have to identify risks from different layers and resolve them individually and all together. So that's an additional complexity, an additional challenge. Also, another challenge is that, as we said before as well, the telco cloud is about a distributed environment where we are providing capabilities to different network sites. And this complexity, we have to manage different sites to identify where the different risks come, the different security risks come, and we need probably additional tools to correlate this information. Also, the fact that the Telco Cloud is going to be a common platform that will provide the infrastructure for multiple applications is an additional challenge, because we have to guarantee some kind of isolation, so that when one of the applications that is running in a given hardware or in a given machine, let's say, where other application is working, if one of them is attacked, the others are not affected. So we need to do some kind of segmentation, isolation based on multi-tenancy, namespaces in Kubernetes, or things like that. And these are more or less of the challenges. One additional, let's say the final principal one is, as you commented before, we are very keen on the data transit security. But in this case, we have one additional element, which is the cluster. The cluster itself has to be secured. We have to secure the community in the cluster, the community between the different pods. And this is a new thing that we were not used to, and we need to apply mechanisms to resolve this. So these are more or less part of the challenges that I identify.
Okay. Andy, do you want to take a crack at this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Lewis has highlighted many of the things that are unique about cloud native, which then give you security considerations. If you could label me the ultimate optimist, but one thing I might say, I think we're here this week in the 10th anniversary of the white papers that led to the NFV standardization initiative in ETSI. So in other words, virtualization of telco infrastructure is 10 years old. And now we're taking another leap, another step into cloud native. Now, I think the temptation 10 years ago was to port your application into a virtualization environment and not necessarily fully realizing the exposure of new internal interfaces between functions. Cloud native, I think, it's now clear-cut. You would be insane to do it if you didn't have the orchestration frameworks and the security frameworks in place, and you can inherit some of those from the established cloud provider environments and infrastructures. So there we are. That's the optimist's way of looking at it. In fact, one thing is you can't do it without putting these things in place. Unlike previously, you could kind of try to get away with it. And secondly, there are reusable frameworks and orchestration platforms and security tools that can be repurposed and reused for telco workloads.
Might you care to cite one or two of those, Andy?
I think obviously Kubernetes on the one hand, the security products that go around Calico in that networking between pods and within pods, and I think Tigera comes to mind in that space. So there are quite a few players and specialists to look at.
Nagendra, your thoughts on overall cloud security challenges for a telco?
I would actually like to categorize into three specific categories. First and foremost, I think, how do you design, how do you build, how do you architect security infrastructure for the network? As you all know, once we have a telco network, and you need to build appropriate infrastructure to protect the assets and data. Now, so that would be my first point. And just to explain a little bit on that, in a typical implementation, in a cloud-native environment, the application is broken down into microservices. And as you know, each of these services tend to behave like an application. So they expose interfaces, they have APIs, they have specific data requirements. Some of these services actually have public interfaces, which means they bring additional vulnerability. So what typical service-based architecture also you also need to take care of lateral movements. It's not just the north-south attack that one needs to take care of. It's also the east-west, because certain services are, have certain exposure which the other services don't, and certain services may also have data, may actually be hosting data, so you also need to protect it. Now, so obviously, designing architecture and implementing a network security infrastructure is a big challenge. And the second thing I believe is also important is, okay, once the network is built, how do you actually manage the network? Now, with so many moving parts in the network, you have multiple ecosystem partners, ecosystem players, you have different layers, you have decomposed the network, you have disaggregated the platform. Each will have its own access control mechanisms and so on. So as an operator, how do you ensure that whatever golden configuration that you had on day 0, day 1, continues to remain, right? How do you avoid configuration drifts? How do you ensure that access control policies remain what it needs to be, right? So I guess, and how do you, and for tier 1 operators, how do you integrate this new concept into your existing SOC, right? I guess that's going to be the second challenge which an operator would have to get past. And third, and probably the foremost, and I guess we also heard about this in the previous discussion, is raising awareness. How do you train the SOC personnel, the personnel who actually manage the network in cloud security? I think that's to me, that's the main thing. It's not just you take care of the perimeter security, you make sure that interfaces, I guess Gil made a great point. You just protect the interface, you just protect the hardware, and you're done. But I guess with the softwareization happening and each service behaving like an application on its own, you also need to take care of other aspects. So awareness of cloud security principles, adopt a zero trust mindset, I guess is going to be an important aspect which an operator would have to invest in.
Okay. So we talked about technology a bit. As I think we probably all recognize, security is technology, people, and processes. And when it comes to people, the people dimension from a security perspective, there are lots of pieces. But in the sort of dev and operations world, I think what we're looking for in a cloud-native environment is we can't, in a highly dynamic environment, we can't have the security team exercising its conventional function of saying no every 5 minutes. That's a disaster. So the security team has to sort of adapt its behavior. Similarly, on the dev side, the quid pro quo of the security team isn't Dr. No anymore, is that they have to take a little bit of the security responsible themselves. They have to accept that it's shift left, it's not shit left. They have to be welcoming of that movement and not resentful of it. From a behavioral point of view, from a people perspective, Luis, in an organization like Telefonica, how do you try to encourage, stimulate, incentivize changes in attitude, changes in behavior where security is concerned? Okay,
the first thing is that we need specific skills for security risk, for the infra security risk. Since, as we said before, we are decoupling, the infrastructure itself has to be secure, so we need a specific security experience, security knowledge for the infra, identifying infra risks. So that's one point. Another point that we have to put in the day-to-day process is, in this cloud-native world, we have incorporated the CI/CD tools. So in this CI/CD, it's important that we incorporate security checks as well. The CI/CD are for deploying a new element, a new component. Before deploying the application, you run a CI/CD, or you have a periodic CI/CD, or when you do a software upgrade. We have to put in the mind of the day-to-day process that this CI/CD should incorporate security checks. And additionally, there's a new thing. Same as we need specific skills to identify security issues, we also need specific skills to manage the amount of information that is coming from different layers. We may need, and responding to a comment from Nagendra, how we can have in a general SOC manage all this complexity. We need to we probably need new tools to correlate information from different sites, from different locations, and we need to have the people trained to manage, to correlate this information and be capable of defining actions based on the information from the different layers.
You used the phrase, we need new skills, I think, 3 or 4 times. Those new skills can come from young people that are cheap and enthusiastic to learn. They can come from your existing people. They can come from buying outside expertise that is a little bit more expensive. What mix do you look for?
This is new for everyone, so everyone needs to be trained. So no matter if you are young or no, probably the youngsters come with more, as you say, more enthusiastic, but everyone needs to learn all this. So we need to invest in training people on identifying security and managing security for infra and managing correlation of information, security information from different layers.
Very good. Andy?
Patrick, if I might chime in, I think all of that's absolutely right, and education is key around upskilling to the latest technologies. But some things are eternal, and culture is super important. So culture in organizations, just a quick example. So when I was leading network teams in my previous career in Vodafone, and didn't own security in my team, later I had both under my responsibility, but networking and security, you know, the negotiation about a firewall rule would start, well, deny all, permit all. Okay, who's gonna, you know, let's say compromise?
Adjudicate.
Who's gonna compromise first, and what should the rule be? So what I mean is that the network guys are introducing a new technology. This time it's cloud native. I'm remembering the MPLS introduction and explaining or needing to explain to a security audience that layer 3 VPNs are safe. Okay, well, I start with the assumption that they're not. Okay, and it's just having that discussion because you have to explain what the heck is this layer 3 VPN? What does it really mean? What's it mean in hardware? What's it mean in software? What's it mean in layers of privileges for users? Who can change a config and join two VPNs that are not supposed to be joined? Yeah. So discovering the implications of the new technology together with cross-functional teams in a healthy culture where it's all one team, actually. It's all going in the same direction. But not making networking fanboys out of security people so that they let things slip through the cracks or you know, they still need to represent their responsibility, which is to keep that network secure.
Security is responsibility of everyone, you know?
It is.
Yeah, of course.
Absolutely. So there's that cultural dimension on top of the educational, I would say.
Sure. The people side, Nagendra.
Well, I guess I'll probably cover the supplier side of the story, right? I guess Louis and Andy spoke about mostly on the operator side. One of the challenges that we are facing is absolutely, one is the cultural mindset. You know, people are used to doing a certain way. People still believe that security comes at the end. Security is a separate function on its own. And one of the challenges we have is to convince the R&D community that security is not a separate function anymore. It's a transversal and impacts every aspect of your software development lifecycle, be it in the requirement side or on the architecture side, where you have to consciously evaluate and do a threat assessment on the architecture that you're developing. And likewise, the developers need to think about how to write software securely. And also important thing is testing. Testing was always shifted to the right, but I guess with the left shift mechanism, one easy technique that we implement in Symfony is that as soon as the requirements are written, you end up writing your master test plan from the get-go. So you have a master test plan based on the requirements, and the test plan is then fine-tuned and drilled down to make sure that the software meets the requirements. You don't want the testers to be influenced by the development community, right? They want to be agnostic to the development and ensure that they always trace back to the requirements. So this has taken some time, and it's a big cultural shift. And to me, I think one way you solve this is by relying on automation, right? One classic example that we are trying to implement is that as the developer is writing the software, if you have an integrated development environment, which can also verify that the software is written securely, and you do have that, right? There are vendors who supply a development environment where, as you type the code, it will flag you for whether you're, violating the security standards. That makes the life a lot more easier, right? As opposed to writing the software, then you send it for code review, and then someone has to do the, scan, right? A separate scan, and then there is a closed loop. So I guess it's all about automating the process, making it simpler for the development community to start implementing these so-called DevSecOps principles. I guess that's what you were referring to with the shift-left philosophy.
Yeah.
I guess that would be
I'll just
my-
ask one question there, if I may. So today, leading operators will, in an RFP, they'll ask for a vendor to supply, a PDF document describing what their development processes is and what the security component of that is. Leading operators will do that, and it's a kind of tick box, see attachment. How far are we, do you think? How far are you in terms of your responses as a vendor from an operator basically saying, don't just tell us what your dev environment is, we want it audited. When can you open yourselves up to an audit?
Reports, right?
How far away are we from that, do you think?
Some customers also ask for test reports. But one thing I should indicate, though, and maybe Louis may have a different view on it, majority of the RFPs that I have looked at, they would like to make sure that we follow a certain standard process, be it the GSMA, NACIS, process. But that is okay. That is one way to be sure that you have a proper software development life cycle. But I guess what I am referring to is a bit different, right? It's all about how you integrate security into your CI/CD pipeline, how you convert your DevOps into a DevSecOps, right? As far as I know, none of the operators so far have actually specifically asked for, but I guess it's a maturation process, as Louis said, as more and more RFPs come along and they go from the POC state to a much more larger rollout. You definitely would, I can imagine this happening anytime now, right? They would ask for your secure coding report, right? Because there is a category of tools called SAST, static analysis software, right? This can actually give you the complete report. Now, granted that there is a lot of IP that one has to share, and a vendor might say no, but I can imagine these kind of things coming along slowly. But to answer your question, I think majority of the RFPs that I've seen just focus on a standard process that can be audited, mostly the GSMA NACIS.
Right. Andy, you and I are both from the UK. We're both familiar with the new Telecommunications Security Act. I happen to believe that it is going to herald a really major, substantial change in the way UK telcos do security. If you look at the draft code of practice, which is more than 100 pages long, that's going to be finalized and kind of closed off in the next coming few weeks. There are 4 pages of that code of practice that are dedicated to prescribing how you secure the management plane alone. Now, in my mind, also within that act, there is the provision for telcos to be fined up to 10% of their annual revenues for failing to comply with the Telecom Security Act.
Global revenues.
Global revenues, indeed. So, my view, the Telecom Security Act is going to substantially change how security is done by most telcos in the UK. And I think it's a case of, if the operators aren't doing this well enough themselves, they will be forced to by the regulators. What do you think?
Okay. So this is something that I've been living with for the last 2 years. Amongst other things, I represented industry on the steering group for the new UK Telecommunications Lab, which is a government-funded initiative which will replace the lab whose sole purpose was to allow some visibility into the Huawei product. So that lab is redundant now. And instead, any new vendor being introduced into the UK market is subjected to the same kind of scrutiny. So huge implications for everyone in the supply chain. I'm not going to say whether I believe 10% of annual global revenues is the right number to penalize the end customer of what we build in TIP, which is the infrastructure of the future. The end customer of that, leaving out the consumer and the enterprise, but let's say the end customer of the infrastructure is the telco. So they're the natural target to be liable, but liabilities must cascade down the supply chain. And unless you feel that it's in any way feasible to have this, well, there could be, 10 10 vendors in the end-to-end of the network, and in each of their products there's 6 layers in the stack from different players, and 6 by 10 becomes, an independent audit of all of that, repeated for every time anything gets upgraded to the next release because new vulnerabilities could creep in. It's not a practical model, and it's not a practical model to leave the liability with the end customer. So the liabilities, and I think you'll find that audits will be expected. I'm commissioning an audit by an independent provider of security testing tailored to the NCSC Telecom vendor security annex coming out of the UK Telecom security bill right now. And it's going to be the first of kind. But I think, and the system under test is system on chip for small cells. Okay. So, it's going to be necessary to be proactive, to get into a pipeline, to be tested, and to make things respected internationally. So actually, the end customer who was interested in this chip being tested is in a different geography altogether, but is happy with the UK's testing framework, and so is asking for this testing to be done. So yes, absolutely, it's coming. I think to make it in any way efficient, it needs to be cascaded down the stack so that you inherit the security safeguarding that's done by the subcomponent, and then the subsystem, and then the components within the subsystem. You're always being mindful that there might be some vulnerabilities that arise out of reaggregation.
All right, thanks. Luis,
Okay.
Telefonica, are you terrified of the Spanish regulator going to make you do things differently than you usually do?
We take security very seriously, of course, not only because security issues impact the operation, also impact the customer's trust. So we take it very seriously, same as we did with the GDPR Act for identity and confidentiality. Now the EUCs, the European Cybersecurity Act, will come out very soon, and we will be compliant with it, of course, because we need, not only because of the fines, but we will be compliant with this, and we will request our providers to also be compliant with this. So this auditing that you were commenting, of course, we will be interested in having this auditing for all the products that we get from our vendors and the solutions that we build to guarantee that these security acts are actually, we are actually compliant with them. But I insist, not only because of the fines, because of the operation as well.
Right. Nagendra.
I think it's a good move, right? I mean, and you see these kind of what we call as essential requirements in India coming from different geographies.
Yes, indeed, yeah.
Right? You have EU Toolbox, which has a set of recommendations and technical measures, strategic measures. Likewise, you have in the US, you have NIST and FCC, right? But at the end of the day, I feel as a vendor, I'm speaking on behalf of a vendor, at least from my analysis, if I look at, for example, EU Toolbox, they have multiple technical measures which takes care of misconfiguration, access control. So they all, at the end of the day, they all say the same thing, right? I mean, you talked about management plane being four pages. What does it say? Pretty much the same thing. You make sure that your access control is accurate. You have separate out management plane from non-management plane, so that, right, which is about security zoning. So as a vendor, I'm not too petrified. Of course, I need to make sure that my R&D community sticks to those guidelines. But I guess it's a heartening thing that security is getting the right attention with regulators that
Right.
ought to get.
Yeah. In the interest of time, I'm going to ask this just to Luis, if that's okay. So, Luis, we've talked a lot earlier today, during the day, about the multi-cloud environment, Azure, AWS, Microsoft Private Cloud, cloud provider stack in private cloud, these multiple varieties of different cloud environments that a telco is investing in. As a security guy, I hate that because I've got all these different environments, I've got all these different tools to learn, I can't stand it. What I really want is a kind of universal aggregated layer where I can apply security consistently across all of my environments no matter what. Is that a realistic prospect, do you think? Or realistically, do we have to just live with those different security environments and just suck it up?
That's an interesting point. We commented before that we'll have different layers, and each one of them will have to report the security vulnerabilities, issues, whatever, to manage them consistently in one central location. To do this, what we need is logs. We need logs, not observability logs as we have today. Typically, we need a specific security-related logs to identify vulnerabilities, threats, and all that. And also, we need to have them as standard. This is something that still we don't have, but we need to work in standardizing the contents of the security logs so that we can manage security from different infrastructures in the same way. And this will, let's say, will help towards your concerns.
Interesting. Equally, in the interest of time, I'm going to put this question just to you, Nagendra. In terms of your work with the O-RAN Alliance and Open RAN security, what can you give us by way of an update of what O-RAN Alliance is doing to secure Open RAN?
Yeah, for those of you who are not aware, I am one of the co-chairs for the security work group 11 in O-RAN Alliance. So that's a great question. I think the first and foremost, I think you mentioned this in the beginning. When we say standards, we are usually used to standards which talk about how to secure interface, right?
3GPP,
3GPP model, and maybe security protocols and so on. We never got into, in 3GPP at least, we never got into securing the platform, right? We never talked about zero trust model, right? I mean, there is a work item in 3GPP now which is studying zero trust for 3GPP networks. You know what? In O-RAN Alliance, from the very get-go, we adopted the principle of zero trust. And what does it mean? There may be an insider in the network, right? He may be successful, authenticated, authorized, but then, he may actually be a rogue entity who may actually be causing trouble. So we adopted zero trust access, and I think that is the fundamental approach we take for every work item that we have today. We do a threat modeling. We always take into effect that there is an insider who can perpetrate problems. It is not just about external attacks anymore, right? So I think that is something which I would like to mention. Second important point is there is a specific work item, Louis, maybe we can talk about it later, on security log management. I don't know whether we will get to a state where we will standardize a whole lot of things on how you retrieve the logs and process the logs, but definitely there is a dedicated work item on security log management. Last but not the least, we also have a work item on O-Cloud security, right? Folks who attended the previous session panel, I guess there was a mention about O-Cloud and O-Cloud platform and so on in O-RAN Alliance. We have a dedicated work item with people participating in O-Cloud. And just watch out, in the next 6 to 8 months, we will have a complete set of specifications for the O-Cloud platform. And the final point is, I would like to, O-RAN Alliance just released a web statement on what's happening with the security work group yesterday. And I would urge folks to go to O-RAN Alliance and then look at this blog post. They don't call it as blog post anymore, but it gives a complete detail of where we are and what is it that is coming up next. I think that's definitely going to be a good read.
Very good. Last question I'm going to put to you first, if I may, Luis. So in the last year or so, Microsoft has said they're going to spend $20 billion on security. Google said, within 5 years, I think, Google has said they're going to spend $10 billion on security. They recently bought Mandiant, which is one of the world's leading incident response companies. You go to all the big breaches of the last few years, and you find that it's, Mandiant's usually there crawling over the calamity and doing the response and recovery. Mandiant is a top incident response company. Google bought them. So $10 billion from Google and Mandiant, $20 billion from Microsoft. My question to you is, I wonder whether a telco as big as Telefonica can even come close to competing with that kind of investment in security, let alone a smaller telco. Tell me.
We don't try to compete with them. We don't see them as competitors, the public cloud providers. Actually, we will build our Telco Cloud with them, so we can leverage that investment. So that's good. The investment that they do in security, we can benefit from that, because we will request them to meet the requirements, not only the functional, as we discussed in the previous panel, also the security related. Specific for public cloud, there are additional acts that require the confidential computing to guarantee that the data is secure not only in transit and at rest, but also at processing. So all this investment is good towards that, and as I say, we can benefit for that. We will leverage it.
Okay. A very quick response to that, Andy, and then Nagendra, if you would. Andy, please.
Sure. I think it's slightly a sort of a category error type of question in that, you know, there's a handful of these hyperscalers. There's 600 telcos. Okay, even the biggest of the big are not as big as these guys. So whereas they tend to acquire to solve problems, telcos tend not to, and they tend to rely on a total market solution to problems. And that can stem from collaborating in initiatives like TIP, but also pooling, let's say, the vendor pools the demand globally, and you know, that's the way that things work. Okay, that ecosystem can be more open, but it doesn't fundamentally mean that operators will make major acquisitions in the cybersecurity space. There may be some exceptions to the rule, but they will not acquire the complete portfolio, whereas hyperscalers might. I'd be really interested in where Rakuten Symphony sits between those two categories, and whether it's different from a telco in any respect. But I'm speaking for, you know, telcos that I understand best.
Nagendra, you want to close this off?
Yeah, maybe I'll just respond to you separately offline. But just to answer your specific question, I think if I'm an operator, I need to take into account that the risk profile is going to be different, right? Whether I host my applications on a public cloud versus on a on-prem, right? So what comprises acceptable level is completely up to the operator, right? There can't be a standard recommendation. However, what I do see is that certain critical applications, you know, especially, you know, the databases, you know, where you host subscriber information, I would imagine that to be part of the on-prem, right? So I guess, but that might, again, it's completely an operator call, but I would imagine a hybrid environment where you would have certain critical systems in your on-prem environment and certain, you know, pure control plane type functions move to cloud. I guess that's how I see the, you know, the migration to cloud, or at least a little bit of a mix and match happening.
A big pressure on the on-prem environment to maintain competitive security capabilities independent of those guys, though, right?
And that's a good point, Patrick. The underlying security requirements wouldn't change, right, as an operator. However, the way the system is, right, the attack vectors could be different, right? So I think it's a highly technical topic where I have to do a complete threat modeling to determine whether it makes sense for me to go to public cloud or not, right? Multi-tenancy is an issue, right? I mean, there are certain aspects which we need to take into account.
My apologies. I've let my own enthusiasm for the subject get away with me. I would like to thank our three speakers for a terrific session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great conversation.